We're not muted.
Oh yeah, interesting. Okay, so I think I'm recording, and I think I should be screen sharing as well. And I don't know, has that, hopefully that's readable for everybody. Okay, cool. So the other thing at the top of this lecture I just want to say is I believe that the git fetch that you can do to like reset your local branch, that also should be working. So you should be able to use that without any problems today, but obviously like let me know in the Slack if that's an issue so that I can start pasting things back into Slack if it's not working again. Okay, so today's all about forms. If you've done the warm-up stuff, you'll know already that the key objectives are to demonstrate how to build a basic HTML form with regular HTML form elements. That's kind of in some ways the most important thing because everything is really based off that. And then some of the more detailed bits are using the onChange handler to capture input values, utilizing a submit event, which will allow us to work with the form data, and also building forms with like many inputs and different types of inputs, because we can have text input, email, we can have radio select, drop-down menus, all those things are different types of input. And the other key thing is the ability to use controlled inputs, which means that we're using React to actually like get information out of the form and then do something with it. So the way that this lecture is going to work is there's going to be we're going to do all of those objectives. We're going to go through them twice, once in like a really simple sort of toy project, which everybody should have up now. And I've already done npm install, npm start. So I'm assuming everybody's kind of at that same point as well. And so the very first thing we're going to do is take a look at the design file. So that's here. We've got, as you can see, we've got like the simple form up at the top, and then this like more complicated form app down below. And the very first thing we're going to do is just run through the simple form app. And what I think the idea of it is going to be is you can see that there are two inputs. So there's this, this one like what looks like probably a text input, a second text input, and a submit button. And my guess from the way that this is written, it says Fido is a dog, Tweety is a canary, Goldie is a fish, that the name part is probably coming from this first input and the type of pet is coming from the second input. Just like that's what I can glean just from looking at the design file. And then afterwards we'll move on to this more detailed format, which is taking a username and an email and a role. And I think this role, that to me looks like a drop-down menu. And there's a submit button there as well. And then I imagine what it's doing is it's going to render a name with the person's name, their email, and their role down at this bottom bit here. Okay, so that's what that is. And we're going to go into our index.js to make a start on our very first one. So yeah, it's just saying ready to start GP at the moment. And yeah, actually, let's just have a look at our package JSON while I remember. This is maybe one of the more simple React things we've seen. It's just literally got React, React DOM, and the only other thing that we haven't seen before is this UUID dependency. And that is just going to give us it's a way of like generating unique IDs. And down here we're rendering simple form down in the render statement of our index.js. And then when we move on to the more complicated one, we'll uncomment our app, but we don't need to do that just yet. Okay, so we yeah, we are just rendering our simple form. And just to talk through this, it looks like we've got a pets list, which is just like an array of objects with a pet name, a pet type. And okay, so I think the first interesting thing to do here would be to import our state hook so that we can get this state into our component. So actually we've already got React and we know that the state hook comes from React, so we can just do it up here like this. Okay, cool. And we are going to declare our default values to see how they correspond to, and we can see how they correspond to the two properties in our pet list array of objects. So what we'll do is we will make some initial form values. And we'll make this to be our pet name. We want that to just be, to start off because it's initial, just to be a default empty string. And for the pet type, also just to be an empty string. And then inside of our simple form, we want to use our state hook to actually create the default state and to update it inside of our simple form. So we're going to create our first little slice of state. It's going to be our pets and set pets. And then we'll use our hook. And we also want to have something that can update the form values. So we're going to have our second slice of state is going to be form values. And as the pattern always goes, set form values. And again, we're going to use our hook to set these into state. And we want these to be the initial form values that we just defined up here as being empty strings. So just to recap, we've got our two initial values for state. We have the pets list and the initial form values, and two actual slices of state, which are going to be dynamic, the items that we currently have, and the state of the form that allows us, this one down here, the state of the form that allows us to actually add extra items over time to our pets list. So let's actually go and render something. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, so inside of our div, we can actually start to, let's actually render something here. So we have our return, and let's give ourselves a new div. And inside of our div, we can have give ourselves like a heading, so H1. And we can just call this simple form because that's what we're doing. And we want to, sorry, just one moment. And we just want to be able to map over our pets. And return a new div. And let's give that a key of IDX from here. And then pet name is a pet.pet type. And I'm just going to run through this fairly quickly just so that it's up and running. And we're also going to, because we're going to go through this all again in our second pass through. And then we'll give this a class name because there's actually some styling in a different file. So hopefully this will now work. We'll go and take a look. Obviously we're missing something here, but we no longer need this div anyway. Let's see if there are any issues. Yeah, okay, so we have our very simple form. And well, we don't have our simple form, but we have a setup for it. So now we're actually just going to do the actual form part of this. So we are going to add in the form itself. And we're going to do, it's going to be, the form type is going to be an input. And we'll give that input a type of text. And we should also give it a prop of name as well, which should be the slice of state that we want this particular form to actually correspond to, because it should be matching exactly the property that it's actually going to be gathering data for. And we can also give it a value of form values as well. And there's a final prop that we want to give it, which is an onChange. And we're just going to give that a change function. Okay. And as we save it, it formats it quite nicely. Okay, so now it looks like we have an input and it has these 4 props. So that's name, type, value, and onChange. And that is the basic thing that all of our forms are always going to have. So that's just something really worth remembering. So let's see what we've got. No, I seem to have broken it. That's fine. I thought that was going to work. Let me see if I can fix what the issue is. Oh, I couldn't. Oh yeah, I might be. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right, because change is undefined. So the thing that we've got to do then at the top of the function is to just make any kind of simple change function just to stop it from breaking. This will probably make it work again. And it does. And we've even got our form, which at the moment doesn't take any input. So if you try and type in it, it's not going to do anything, but at least it's not crashing. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can make the second input. So we know that we made the first one for the for the pet name, and now we have to do the same thing for the pet type. So we can sort of basically copy and paste what we have just done, make the necessary changes. And we can see, and let's have a look and see if it's working. Yeah, we can see that we have, oh yeah, I think I might have meant class name up here actually as well, just to fix that error that was just there. And so now we have our nice clear console, and we have our two forms that don't yet do anything. And what we can do is, just to see that things are working, we can change our initial state if we want. So we can do a pet name of, well, I have a cat called George, and he is a cat. So let's see if this shows up here. Yeah, and so we can see that for that reason, that the forms are completely state driven. So it's like whatever we change in state is going to change in the form itself. So I'm just going to put those back to what they were before. And the next thing we're going to want to do is to create our submit button and submit function. So that means we're going to need to have a submit button. And I think, again, this is going to be, actually, I expected this to be broken because we don't have a, oh, wait. In any event, we need to make our second input in the form. Wait, so, sorry, Chaz, what's that? I don't quite understand. Can you say that? Can you make that more explicit? I might have done something wrong. Inside of my form element. Oh, I see. Yeah, you're right. I see what I've done. Partly, I'm just not used to using this particular, I've like made it really like high contrast, but I'm just not used to the way the text looks in this particular theme. So I think you mean like that, right? I think that's right. Okay. It should be clearer for me, but apparently like this like extremely high contrast text kind of baffles my eyes slightly, but it should be really clear. But the ending div tag back outside, oh my god, thank you so much. Yeah, that's right. Okay, thanks for fixing my syntax. That's awesome. Fantastic. So let's have a look. Let's see if it's all still working. And I think what we're also going to want to do here is we are also going to want to have a submit button as well. So that means that we're going to put the on submit at the level of our form. And I think this will be now broken because submit is not defined, which means that we have to come in here and do the same thing that we did, exactly the same thing that we did for the change. And hopefully this will be back to fixed. Okay, so what we've basically just done is we have two slices of state, one that is taking care of just keeping track of the resources, and the other one that's keeping track of the form values. So that's the resources and that's the form values. And then we have a form, which thank you very much, everybody who helped me debug that, which has got the submit handler, which we're going to eventually create. And we've also got our, what else do we have? We have our two inputs, and they have the properties that our inputs are always going to have. Like no matter what other inputs we end up adding, it's always going to have these ones, so it's worth keeping that in mind. And of course, we have our change handler as well, which is going to take input, and when it changes, it's going to update something. So now let's actually do the change function. So we're going to be updating a slice of state. We're going to be updating a slice of state that we know is an object. It's the initial form values, which means that we have to do some kind of tricky syntax to make it work. So I'm just going to start typing that out. And it's going to look something like this. So we're going to have a name and a value. From event.target. And the reason that we have this event.target is because basically this is the React version of the typical HTML target. And what happens there is that we get to pull any of the changes that happen in the inputs from the event.target. So then what we want to do is, once we have grabbed those two elements, which are going to be properties on side of the event.target, we have destructured them and we have access to them. And so now that we have those values, which will be things that we're typing in here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to update the form values using this set form values hook with those new bits of data, which looks like this. So we know that it's going to be, so we know that when we call this, we know that what we're creating is an object because that's the data, that's the original declaration that it is. So we can do an object literal in there. And we can grab those old form values, whatever they were before. And then we do this, name, value. And this here is not an array. This is an override. So this spread operator here, it takes the old form values and makes a copy of them and is going to call this function with it. And which is what we want it to do. But then whichever form that we have typed in, whether it's a name or it's the pet type, we want to override whatever the old value was in form values with whatever the new form type is and the string that the user has input. And this thing here that looks like an array literal is not an array literal. It is a computed variable that is taking it from whatever, whether it's pet type or pet name. And then the value of that is going to be whatever the user has input for the pet name and pet type. Okay, so that looks as it should look, I think. Oh, and can I just take a second here just to check? Can anybody tell me if are you able to update from GitHub? Is that working? If anybody could just type in Slack just to let me know, because it'd be just, now that I've typed some things in there. Oh, amazing, it's working. Hooray. Okay, that's great. Fantastic. That's great to know. Okay, so then the next thing that we're going to have to do is, and as you can see, one of the reasons why we start out very small with forms is until we've got all of the moving pieces working, nothing works at all. So we don't have, so even now though we can now actually type into this as a result of what we've just done, we can't actually do anything effective because forms don't work until you've got all of the moving pieces together, basically. And what the default behavior of the form is that unless we do something to change it, when we type information into it and hit submit, the default behavior is to cause a full page reload, which is not something we want to happen. So in our next, in the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to figure out a way to avoid that from happening. Okay, so we want to get the submit working. So where is our submit? Here it is. So when we submit, we want to ultimately create a new, what we want to be doing is setting pets. We want to be using this particular hook here, but that means that we have to get those pets wherever they are from state and then set them into that new state. So, and we know that we need to create an object to do that. So we're going to create a new object called new pet. And it's going to have a pet name and a pet type properties. And these should come from form values dot pet name. And what we're also going to do here is dot trim, because if a user starts typing like this and types, well, actually, let's give it a pet name. I have a dog called Wiko. And as you can see, there's going to be lots of white space on either side. We never want that to go into a database, so we can just get rid of that immediately by trimming it. And we want to do the same thing for the other property. And so we're pulling this off form values dot pet type, and we're also going to trim. And then we need to actually update our pets, as we just said, using set pets. And I think we're going to be using basically the same, the very similar syntax, but there's one difference between. So even though we're going to be using the spread operator to update our slice of state, because it's a different data structure, we need to do it slightly differently. So in this case, we are going to be creating an array literal because our pets list that we're updating itself is an array. So we know we want to create that array literal, and then we want to add into it pets. And because that's what was previously there, that's spreading that old object. And then we also want to be adding into it our new pet. And that really is working the same as actually just like functionally, it's doing exactly the same thing as this, which is if we called set pets and, invoke set pets and do pets dot concat new pet. So those two are exactly the same thing, but because what we most common, and I'll leave that there I'll leave this one there commented out so that you can see that they're interchangeable essentially. But because this is really the pattern that we so typically see, that's why I'm doing it like that. And then of course, the last thing we probably want to do in here is set things back to initial form values. So that means that when somebody has typed stuff in, so my pet dog, well, actually it's clearing out already, but we want to reset the state to be whatever they were initially. And so in here, then we want to do set form values to be initial form values. Oh, I think maybe, yeah, so I think the reason this is not going to work when we try it is because we haven't done what I mentioned earlier, which is we have to figure out a way to reset. So that means that we've got to put in an event, we have to prevent the default behavior. So the default behavior is to do a full page reload, but we don't want to do that. We want to prevent default. So now this should at least somewhat work. Let's see if we can now stop it from doing a full page reload. Okay, great, that's good. So it captured our state that we typed in, it didn't do the reload, but the component updated so that it rendered our new data. Okay, so I will let you guys take a break in just a second, but just a quick recap before we break for a few minutes. This is just a really simple form, but it's the best thing to know because you can build all other forms that you ever need to build using this very simple thing here. So you should just always have a copy of this somewhere to hand so that you can copy it and practice it until you know it quite well. And another thing to know in terms of kind of like learning and recall and memory is that name, type, value, and onChange, these are things that you're just going to see over and over again. So it's just worth keeping in mind that that you will just see that cropping up over and over again as the key things. And it's the last two, the value and the onChange, that make this a controlled form, meaning that it's a form that is driven by state. So that means that when we update elements on the form in state, the form itself is being updated. The reason it's simple and the reason things can get more complicated, bless you, Nico, sorry, my dog's just sneezing, is, I mean, there are no network requests. We don't have any validation. So at the moment you could put any text into this and it would our form would accept it no matter what it was. And the next things we're going to have a look at are making those things like slightly more complicated. So I will just set a 5-minute timer. And yeah, see you in 5 minutes. Hey everybody, so welcome back. I'm going to change, I'm going to change my theme for the moment just because I think not everybody is finding it that nice to look at. I was trying to be really, trying to make it as like clear as possible, but I actually also don't like this theme very much either. So is this any better, or is this still like kind of too extreme? I know, what do we think? Theme good? Better theme? That's good, better, way better. Oh, okay, good, okay, good. All right, let's have this theme. This is a cute theme. Okay, so welcome back after the break. We have still got our, so what we're gonna do now is we've done our simple form, that was working. Hope that was working for everybody else as well. And now if we go into our index.js, we're just going to do some setup before we get on to step one of the of basically going through all of those objectives for the day again, but just in a more complex way, from a more complex form. So if we go into our render statement, and we can just uncomment this, and actually we can switch them around, I think. And that means that we can comment out the simple form if we want, so we don't see it at all. Or even just switch them around so that the one that we're working on now is at the top. Okay, so I think what's probably a good idea is, so I mean, the main thing that's happening in this, well, the root component for this is app. So if people want to just take a couple of minutes to really just go through and read, don't worry about the comments, don't worry about the steps, but just try and figure out what's going on in app.js, and just kind of mentally think about how those things are mapping over to what we just did in the previous thing. So I'll just give people like 2 minutes to do that. And obviously feel free to start thinking about, I said don't worry about the steps, but you can see that step 1 is there and step 2 is there. So if you're good to go, you could sort of start having a think about how those things map onto the, sorry, the simple form that we just did as well. Okay, and as we're just wrapping up reading through this thing, I will just start looking over some of the similarities and differences that we can see. So we can see on line 7 how we have the initial state, just like we had before. It's an object, and that's already, this is already done for us, which is nice. And then we have our update form. I'm going to stop this timer now. I think we're done. And we have our update form here and our submit form, which obviously map onto the update and the submit that we just had a look at in the other one. And you know what else is interesting in this file? I think there's an Axios request, so we know that we're going to do some kind of a network request, although we're actually not really doing a network request because in this is not a real Axios. Unfortunately, this is a kind of a simulated Axios, so that we can get the idea of what it's like to do a real Axios request, but without us bothering to have to like start up a server, etc. But it actually works very similarly, so it's going to be the same API in terms of us using it. And as we've seen before, we can already kind of understand what the just from looking at the UI here, what it's going to do. We need to build out the form things for the username, email, and role, and submit. And what else? Oh, I think another big change here is, oh, sorry, I've closed down app. Sorry about that. Let me just get that back open. Not sure how I did that. Another thing here is that our form is actually going to be, is a separate component, and we're going to have to inject props into it. And the friend form component won't be holding any state. And instead, we're just going to practice giving it its own data and callbacks using props. Okay, so let's find out what the instructions for step 1 was. It says we need state to hold all of the values of the form. And it says fix this using the state hook. So I'm going to give you guys just like a minute or so, or just not even a minute, just like a few seconds, however long it takes, to give that a go. And you can drop replies to that in Slack, which I will look at. Nice. And Marcos has given me something that I think looks pretty good, actually. I think that's exactly what I would have done. So Marcos, I'm going to use your state here. Okay, that looks good. I think one thing I should check is, yeah, we've imported our use state hook, so that should work right off the bat. Cool. Okay, so that's now made our initial, put our initial form values, this object here, that should be our initial state, our initial form values. Nice. So now if we check in components, let's see what we've got. So once again, using the React Dev Tools, and look at that. So actually, interestingly, even though this is ultimately going to be in the form at the moment, we have it at the level of app. And so we have our state, and it has, oh, wait, it's already got some initial data. That's great. Okay, so that means that we have, that it's, well, yeah, that our state has worked. That's fantastic. Success. All right, get rid of that for the moment. So now, what was step 2? Where was that? Okay, step 2. So it's saying that the form component needs its props. So check the implementation of friend form to see what props it expects. And I think I was saying this in yesterday's lecture as well, and I know that I've mentioned it to a couple of other people. The good thing to do here is to always have the parent component and the child component side by side when we're trying to do something like this. I'm just going to make the text a tiny bit smaller so I can fit it all in. Oh, actually, I know what I can do. I can just put this in a different screen. Okay. So we have on the left-hand side, we've got our app.js, on the right-hand side, our friend form. And if we go to the declaration here, our function setup, we can see that it needs some props. Okay. And these are the props we can see on line 5 that it's going to be expecting. Oh, and it even gives us a helpful comment. These are the exact props friend form expects. Good to know. All right. So would everybody like to fix the props for me in friend form? And yeah, I'll just give you guys a minute also to do that. Let's see what we've got. Nice. Okay, so I think Chaz has definitely got a great answer there. I think that's what I would also do. Seth, values, update equals update form, submit equals submit form. Yep, that all looks good to me. I'm going to copy over that code. So I think we can get rid of this line 47 here is not really going to be helpful to us. Oh, I copied over too much. Hold on. I didn't need that. I didn't need that. Okay. Okay, great. So now the parent component and the child component should be in agreement. And we've made a change, so it's a good idea to go and check what's happening in the browser at this point in time. So let's see what the components have got. And it looks like the props in friend form are what we would expect them to be. Submit, update values. That's exactly what we just passed down. Seems good. Okay, so what is step 3? Again, I think we can grab the code for this. So where is it gone? Step 3. Okay, so step 3, it looks like is in friend form. The instructions are saying to make an input of type text for username. Controlled inputs need value and on-change props. We knew that from the simple form that we did. Inputs render what they're told. Their current value comes from app state. At each keystroke, a change handler fires to change app state. Okay, cool. So it's telling us we've got to make an input here. So yeah, let us give that a go. And I'm happy to do this one. So now anybody can correct me if I hopefully have got into the right place. Hold on. So we're making an input. And actually we don't need it to be like that. Have an input, and what did it tell us to do? It said that we needed a type of text. Type is text, and name should be, well, what should username be? Well, it looks like this is the username. This is going to be the username form input that we're doing, so that's what it should be. Oh, that should be username. And we need to have a value. And what should my value be? Well, it should probably be the values values.username, because that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to update. And what else does it need? There was one final thing that it needed. I think it also needs an on-change. Again, these are the 4 props that we're just going to see over and over again. And okay, so that's interesting. I don't know, because on-change, that's kind of interesting, because we know that we passed down on-change logic when we did friend form. We have our update and our submit, but then it also seems that in our friend form, we've actually got this on-change function right here. So it seems kind of strange that we've got this duplication, because surely we only need a single on-change. Well, it turns out there is a reason for that, which we will cover soon. And so for the moment, we're going to use the on-change function from friend form itself. So this on-change is going to be used as this prop inside of our input. And if we want to, we can actually add lots of other props just for fun. So we can do things like placeholder. And a placeholder is, you'll have definitely seen this on the web. So it's something like type a username. So it's like just a little string that lives inside of the form. I don't know if it will appear yet. Yeah, so we can see that it just says type a username. So it gives you a prompt of what to do as the placeholder text. And then what else? I mean, we could have something like, for example, a max length. And we could give that a value of, say, 30, because that's how many characters maybe we want it to be. Now, realistically, that is a question not for us. That's much more of a question for our back-end developer if we were doing this in production, because ultimately the length of the input is something that we're taking from the front end. We're going to be posting it through a network request in some way, and it's going to end up at the back end. And whoever's responsible for managing the database at our office where we work, that's a combination. That's something we want to go and you know, Slack them and say, hey, what should this be? Like, what's the max length? And yeah, actually, let me just really quickly see. I can see, I think did someone ask a question in Slack? I think they did, but it's gone. Okay. I think the question was something about, do I need to do props.values.username? That's a great question. The reason that we don't have to do that is because of the magic of destructuring. So now, instead of wherever we want to type props.values.username or props.values.whatever, we can just do values.username because we've destructured it up here. And that's the beauty of that syntax, and that's why we do it. That's just a really good thing to like keep in mind and keep practicing for sure. Okay, so did we check the browser to see that it's all still working? Yeah, it does seem to still be working. And I guess, you know, one question that we might have is, how do we know that this form here is state driven? Well, we can, if we change the initial state back in app.js, so if we change our username to be something like my name or your name, do whatever it is that you want, we can see that it instantly updates. Hold on, give me 1 second. Instantly updates here because it's driven by state. And so whatever, we've created a connection between state and our form, and that's what it means to be a controlled form. Okay, so let's put that back to 0 for 1 second. I mean, not 0, an empty string, of course. So what I would say now is, what we can probably do is, based on that, I would say it'd be pretty easy for you to just take a look at this, and maybe step 4 is something that everybody here can give a go, and I'll just set a timer for a minute. And don't worry if anybody is struggling with this and it's not super clear, it definitely will become clear. But yeah, I'm just going to give you a minute to try and do step 4. Well, actually, I'll set a generous 2-minute timer, but we may end it closer to 1 minute. And so yeah, just to be clear, like step 4 is to make an input of type email or text, or type text for email. And while you're working on that, that's really nice to see that somebody has given it a go. So William, thank you so much for applying to that thread. I think that looks pretty good. It's sometimes hard to read on Slack, but I have to say, I'm gonna use your code, drop it in. And nice, and thank you, Morgan, as well. That's awesome. All right, so what have we got? We have in step 4, we've got name is email. Okay, so I'm going to change oh yeah, my timer. I'm going to change the order of some of these things just so that it reflects what we had before. So we have type of text, name of email. I think that's right. That's what it should be. Value correctly used here from being destructured. And thank you, Victoria, for inputting that. That looks really good as well. We have our onChange is the onChange. That's absolutely right. It's the same onChange. Placeholder, enter an email, perfect. Max length 50. Why not? I mean, I've got a pretty long name. I don't think it's 50 characters, but long emails, why not? Okay, so the one thing I would say here is in step 4, it does say that we could actually do input type of email or text. And I can see here that you've got type text, but there's another type native to HTML that we can use that is type email. And what is nice about that is it does provide us a bit of validation. So if we try to give it an invalid email address, we don't have to do any extra work or validation for HTML to come and say, hey, that's an invalid email. You can't submit this form until you have at least something that looks like, for example, Rhiannon at gmail.com, that kind of follows that form. So let's see what else we can talk about here. Yeah, we have the values email that comes from props, which got destructured up here on line 5. But of course, these props here, they ultimately come from here. These are the form values, and as we know, the form values are ultimately creatures of state. They're derived from state. So the flow there is something is created at the state level in the parent component of an app. It flows down through props. We inject it into the child component, which we're now working on. And so now we have access to this dynamic data. Cool, that looks great. So actually let us, and again, I think we can just to test this, we can see that if we update in app, update these should hopefully look as we want them to look in our app. And yeah, as we can see, our email has also gone in there as well. Nice. I'll put these back. Okay, wait. It is actually pretty much time for a break, so maybe this is a good time to take a break. So I will set a 5-minute timer, and I will see you all in 5 minutes. Hey, and welcome back, everybody. So, where are we? I think we have just completed step 4, and I think we saw that we got that working. We have our placeholders, and we're able to type stuff in. Oh, wait, hold on. We're not able to type stuff in yet. I actually don't think I expected to just yet, because we haven't fixed all of our, we haven't fixed any of our on-change our on-change handlers or our on-submit handlers. So they actually haven't started, that hasn't started to work yet. That's completely fine, and that's as it should be. So, but the next thing we want to do actually is step 5. So we know from the design files, if I go back to the design files, we have this for the role, it looks like we've got a number of options. And so we want to do a drop down. So let's do one of those. Okay, I will start writing that. So to do a drop down, it's the type of input this is a select. And select has, we're going to give it a number of props, which you're going to recognize very much from a regular text input. So it's going to have a name, and we know that that name should be the role, because that's what this that's what this whole drop down is about. We know that it's probably going to need a value, because that's a sort of slice of state that we ultimately want to update. And we know that one of the values from our parent component is, of course, a role. So of course this ought to be value dot role. And we also know that we have to have some way of interacting with this, which means that we're going to need also to utilize our on-change handler. Okay, that line's getting a bit long, but that's fine. Okay, so those are the props that we need for the select. And inside a select, we get options, which makes sense if you think about it, because a drop-down menu has got a list of options which are hard-coded in. Okay, so let me see. Remind me in my design files again what they were supposed to be. So let's go back to our design files. Select a role. Well, we can see down here Michael's role is student. So from that, I'm going to say that we definitely need a student role. That should be one of them. That should be one of the hard-coded options. So we can put that in. Well, actually, the first thing we want to do is have an option that is select role. And because this one's at the top, it's going to be able to, it will tell us that this is a drop-down menu, and then we can select our role. Okay, so option, and then we can have another one that's for a student, maybe. And then if we've got a student, I'm going to go ahead and say that it makes sense to have an instructor. And the other key people that it might make sense to have is a team lead. Okay, so now we've got our select, we've got our options. Let's have a look, see what we've got. Oh, cool. Okay, so our drop down is sort of working. It doesn't let us actually select anything, but it has these like human readable things, and that's great. So that what we now need to do is give ourselves, give our options some values. So the difference here is that they have this like human readable text value that we actually see in the UI. And then we also have this other value, which is the actual piece of data. It's the variable that we actually care about that's going to be passed around in state. And one of the key things, of course, with an option is ultimately like state can only ever have one of these things selected at a given time, because they are options to exclude all other options. Okay, it's not possible to be both a student and an instructor is the idea. So we can have a value, And for this one, because it's just our kind of initial drop down, that could just be an empty string. And for our next one, we can have value of, well, it makes sense that it would be an instructor. Oh, it has to be in a string. Instructor. Value equals, oh, I've done it wrong, sorry. That should be student. And that should be an equal sign. And this last one should be TL. Why not? Meaning team lead. Okay, that looks pretty good. And again, what we can do is going back into our app.js, sorry, let's give ourselves some more room here. We can update our initial state in here and see what effect that has. And as you can see, it's given us a team lead as our initial state. So once again, these inputs, they're controlled, they're driven by state. In this case, because we've input this TL, which we know is represented in our input by the string TL, we know our select form, our select dropdown knows to render the string team lead. Okay, so let's remove that for a second. We don't need that. So now we just have our form back to how it was before. Okay, so that looks like it's implemented. Yeah, it doesn't completely work yet. That's the other thing with forms, like nothing really properly works until we've got all of the pieces implemented. So until we make a start doing our onChange, our change handler and our submit and all of these things, we're not really going to see what we want to see happening. So that is the next step that we're going to do, is step 6, which is where, let me see where our step 6 is. Well, I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to say it's probably in friend form. And it is. Okay, that's great. So what is it telling us to do? Step 6, implement the change handler for our inputs and dropdown. Okay, cool. So that's good to know. Like, as we would imagine, it's going to be the same on change. That doesn't matter what the input is. We don't have to write a separate onChange function to deal with different inputs. It's just completely, we can write some really dry code because it happens for any onChange. And what it's going to do is pull the name of the input from the event object. Okay. And B, pull the value of the input from the event object. And C, use the update callback coming in through props. Okay, cool. So we can start to give that a go. So I guess we know that with our destructuring, anytime you see like pull the name or pull the value of something from an event object, there's a good chance that we can do that all together on one line using destructuring. So I'm going to go ahead and say that we want to do something like const. Well, we know that we want to pull the name and the value. So I'm going to say that that's what we want there. Name and value. And does anybody remember what this object is called? We had a look at it in the, yeah, awesome. Chaz has totally got it. Does anybody else remember it? Event.target, fantastic. Event.target. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have done A and B there. And so then the next thing it says is use the update callback coming in through props. So what is that? So we know that up in props here, we've got this update prop. And if we remember all the way back in app.js, we pass down this update form. Okay, cool. And so this update form is that's a function. It takes 2 arguments, and it seems like these arguments here, they look like they're going to map onto these things that we've just pulled out of our event target. Remember, our event target is something which is it's an event object that's created from HTML. Well, this is a React version of the HTML thing, of the very similar event target from HTML. Okay, so coming under here, I think that what we can probably do is, we know that the invocation that we're going to want is its update. We don't not update form because of the way that it's now being passed in through props. So it's update, and I'm going to say that we can just give it the two arguments that we have just destructured, because it seems to want those two. Okay, awesome. So that looks to me like it's probably done those. So given that we haven't yet actually implemented the substance of the parent function on line 23 in app, we can see what works by dropping in a debugger. And what I mean by working in this case is just, does this parent function actually get called when we change something? So let's see if it does. And yeah, immediately. So if everybody tries that, you should see that you basically immediately, we're immediately triggering this change function the second you do any user input there. Okay, so I'm going to remove that debugger because we don't actually want it to stop the whole time for the moment. But that's good to know that it seems like we're calling everything. So what's next, really? I guess if that's step 6, then the next main thing we have to do is step 7. So that is our on submit. So just to recap that, we have our, so on changes, if we type anything into here, or select any of these things here, this is going to immediately trigger our on change function. That's great. The next thing we need to do is to make a function that triggers our submit. And what I think is that, what does it say? It says step 7, implement the submit handler. A, don't allow the browser to reload. And B, use a submit callback coming in through props. You know what? I think that probably this is something that you might be able to do and drop, and hopefully some people can drop an answer into Slack, and that would be great. So let's just give ourselves a minute to think about that and come up with some code. It's really nice. I'm starting to see some little snippets of code in my step 7 thread. Definitely wouldn't mind seeing some more though, but it looks like people who have got there so far, I think have got it. Nice, awesome. Okay, that's fantastic. Let's see. I think I'm going to take, let me just make this full screen again so we can see what we're doing. Wait, where's our step 7 gone? Here we go. Okay, that's awesome. I can see that lots of people have got this. So event.prevent defaults, taking this from Thomas. And that's going to, as we said before, stop the browser from reloading. And I'm not going to take, so this one also comes from somebody. But actually, so that's interesting. So here's our submit. Our submit, of course, comes through props. If we have a look at our submit function in app.js, it doesn't actually take any arguments. So we probably don't need to actually feed it any arguments, which is completely fine. This is just something that just doesn't take any arguments. It will just run when it's invoked here on line 21, no arguments needed. The implementation hasn't yet been set up, so we don't know what it's going to do. Maybe in the future we do want it to take arguments, in which case we can give them to it. But for the moment, it's completely fine just to call it as it is. And so just so we can preview that, because that's probably coming up pretty soon, what is our submit form going to do? It's going to implement the submit function, which will be used inside the form's own on submit. Okay, so that's this form's on submit here. This button here, okay, that's good to know. This on submit at the form level. And we want to therefore make a new friend object, trimming white space, prevent further action if either username or email or role is an empty string, and then post that to the back end and then clear the form. So that's like a more complex function that we haven't quite got to yet, but we know that when it's all set up, it's all of that functionality will be working from submit on line 20, from our invocation of submit on line 21 of friend form. Okay, cool. So now we really just have the last two functions to write. So we have written our onChange and our onSubmit at the level of the component. And what that means is that, and the reason that we've done it like this, and I think I was mentioning earlier that there's a reason why we do it this way instead of just having one onChange and one onSubmit. We sort of have these two like mirroring functions. So we have our submit form and parent, and our onSubmit here, and our update form and parent, and our onChange here. And the reason we do that is because, well, this is just a very typical pattern that you see in React. And one of the things that you see is that right here in our component level in friend form, we've got access to lots of information because those things are generated at the level of the form. So anything that the user starts to type in here or to select here is something that's available to us within this component. So we might as well take advantage of the fact that we are in scope of that information that's coming back to us from the user to set some values. And that's why we've done, for example, on line 11, we have this const name and value because these things are being taken off the event target that's like built into HTML. And this is our React version of it. So we are taking that opportunity to grab those things. And then once we've grabbed those things and we have them in scope, we correspondingly have sent down our more sophisticated, maybe that's not the right word, more complex functions from the app. And then we can just immediately feed to the update function and the submit form function those little bits of data. And this is just a pattern that you'll see over and over again. Okay, so that was step 6 and that was step 7. So whereabouts is step 8? Okay, so that looks like it is our update form. Okay, so implement a form state updater. Okay, so that sounds to me like we're going to maybe need to use a hook in here, maybe one of the hooks that we've already created, which will be used inside the inputs onChange handler. It takes in the name of an input and its value and updates form values. Right. Okay. So this one it's not really too tricky, and there's not a lot of code that goes into it. But do you remember back in the simple form, we did something that was kind of felt like a bit more complex, not because it is conceptually, but just because we have this spread operator syntax, which works on objects and arrays. So I think it's a good time for us to give that another go. And we were using that like in place of doing like a concat. All right, so if we look at initial, so what's it saying again? So implement a form state updater, which will be used inside the inputs onChange handler, which is this one here. And it takes in the name of an input and its value, and it updates form values. Okay, so let's take a look at form values. So we know that form values is form values is, that's our initial form values over here. And so we basically want to modify what our initial form values are. Okay. And we know that we do that. We know that the only way that we should be manipulating that state is through our hook. So that means that we want to be using our set form values. And we know that the shape of that data is an object, as we can see from here. It's an object with these three properties. So we can write an object literal because we know that ultimately that's what it's going to demand. And then we can take in the all form values. And then does anybody remember how to do this override? Does anybody just remember the syntax for the override? I'm just dropping it into Slack. Oh, nice. Yeah, people got that before me, before I could drop in a question. But yeah, that's great. That's amazing. People have definitely remembered this. I've got some different answers here. So we've got, yeah, just like value. And yeah, that's fantastic. It looks like lots of people are getting the gist of that syntax. That's great. Okay. So that means that we can then do input name and input value. And so these, the input name and the input value, these are the arguments that are fed in. These are the arguments that we can see are fed in over here, which were grabbed off of the event target. So it's like basically whatever these were, whatever the name of the property was and the value was, we have these here. And we're able to update our form values in this way. And this does our override. So whatever it was before, whatever the input name was before and the input value was before, it just completely swaps them out. And we know that in this case, it's either going to be a username or an email or a role. And the function, what's great about this is the function just doesn't need to know ahead of time which of these three it's going to be. We can just smash that old property name with whichever one of the three it actually is from the user's input. So yeah, this was really just the same as the simple example. I think it's exactly the same pattern. And the other great thing about this syntax is that it works exactly the same for radio buttons as well, and for text inputs. The one thing where it is a bit different, and it trips a lot of people up, including very experienced developers, is checkboxes. You have like a little checkbox input. That's the place where it might change. We might see something different. Okay, so we can now put a debugger inside of submit form, and we can see that, let's see if we've actually gathered all of the information that we want. So we put a debugger inside of here. So let's give ourselves a username of Rhi, an email address of rhi@r.com, and instructor. If we hit submit, let's see what we've got. Sorry, I know this is probably really small. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Okay, maybe this is now too big that I can't really see what's going on. And now what we should be able to see, if we go into, if we hit our debugger, like put in our inputs into here, hit submit, and then go here and find scope, open up scope, look into closure, and we should see that our form values are exactly what we would hope they would be. They've been pulled out of our input, and it's our email, our role, and our username. So I will give you guys a minute to play around with the debugger. On yours to see if you can get it working in the way that you think it should be. yeah, it's a good moment to just pull up that console, work out how to find this information, see where it's nested. It's not always that obvious. You might have to like pull some windows around to make it visible. Okay, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to have a look at that. One thing I'd say about forms is like, despite all of the work that we've done, we've written so many functions, we've rendered a load of uh, stuff, we have created inputs. And what's kind of interesting is that even at this stage, things are working a little bit more. Yeah, we don't have any errors in our console. That's great. Um, and if we kind of inspect in our debugger, yeah, it's great. We can see that we are pulling out that right information from the input. But what's kind of crazy about forms is that we still haven't actually managed to do the full loop and we're not rendering our stuff. So that's kind of another thing when I say it's like it really just takes you to have fixed pretty much everything in your form to get it working. And that can be a challenge when you're beginning. And that's why I just want to go back to say it's like whenever you have a task to do that's about forms, always start off with the simplest, cleanest, tiniest example, basically identical to what we did in the simple form. And you can just always build up complexity from there, but start simple. And so with that, I think it is time for a 5-minute break. See you all in 5 minutes. Hey everybody, welcome back. Okay, so I realized that I have not taken a look at, I've been extremely remiss and not taken a look at Slido in a while, and there are actually some really good questions in there. So I'm just going to answer those quickly. Well, not quickly, in the time that it appropriately takes to answer them. Like a few kind of interesting things here. How did I change the font size on the dev tools? So what I did there, I think, so you're referring to the fact that it's now big and hopefully readable. I think what I did was I just did, if you're on a Mac, I did Command plus, and you can do the same with Command minus, and it just makes it bigger. There may be a better way of doing that, but just kind of, there may be some setting that I have never played with because I haven't had to until now share my dev tools so that everybody can read them. That maybe makes them bigger and more readable generally. But yeah, so Command plus, that is how I did that. And okay, another one is in your file list sidebar, how do you change it to see the steps written in with the files like you have it? I think, do you mean like this? So if I do Command B, I can see all the steps like this. I'm assuming that's what is meant by that. And the way that I do that is I pop open the sidebar with Command B on Mac, and then I go into this tab here, which searches the entire code base. And if you type in step in caps, it's going to match it all caps like that, and then you can just see them all there. And somebody asked, does the dropdown have to be hard-coded? Great question. Could it be dynamic or not hard-coded? Could we base it on an array, for instance? And the answer to that is, yeah, you definitely can. And that is also something that's done reasonably frequently. I've definitely had to do that a few times. And yeah, that's something that you will definitely see. And in fact, if you look that up, here's probably a good idea of where it's like worthwhile for people to start trying to Google stuff that will give them like really useful answers. So I would try Googling a few different options like HTML drop-down menu dynamic or populated dynamically or something like that, and see what hits you get. And then see, maybe you need to further refine it and figure out, hey, maybe actually I need to search for React specific stuff because maybe it works a little bit differently in React as it does in plain HTML. But yeah, that's a great question. And that's definitely something that can be done for sure. And in fact, it doesn't just have to be an array. It can be from data. It can be from an object. It could be from JSON data. It could be from data that we fetch back from the back end in a database. There are definitely ways that we can append different lists to be generated, and we could loop over those lists for sure. How is the step 8 function being invoked from step 6? I can't seem to understand. That is a very reasonable question. So let me see if I can. How is the step 8 function? Step 8, where is step 8? Being invoked from step 6. I can't seem to understand. Okay, let me see if I can go through that and make it make sense. And if I don't manage to adequately explain this right now, I apologize, and definitely show up to office hours and ask again, but I know exactly what you're asking. Let me see if I can talk through that. Okay, so let's go straight to the invocation. So on line 13, we are invoking a function that's called update. And we have that because we have it in our props. So whenever we know that something is in props, that means that it has been injected down from above. So if we go to our parent component, we can see where we have declared where we have invoked our friend form component. So this is the invocation of friend form. Remember that in React, everything, so all components, they themselves are functions. And in the return statement here, they are being invoked, just like we invoke any other function, even though the syntax is a bit different. When we invoke a function, we can, well, when we call a component, we can inject props into it. In this case, we are injecting a prop of update. That's what it's going to be called in when it arrives down in friend form. But up here, it actually refers to update form. And if we go and look at the description of update form, we can see what it is and what it does and where it fits in. And we know that it's going to be taking these are the two parameters. And likewise, we pass in these arguments into it. So that's how they map on. If that was still not an adequate explanation of how that flow of props comes about, then yeah, as I say, feel free to check in office hours if I didn't do a good enough job. But again, this is another thing which I feel like with practice and just seeing these patterns over and over again, they become very familiar and very comfortable, even if at the moment it seems kind of confusing that they change names, they change, things change because they're passed down through props. Okay, so where do we finish off? What was the last thing that we did? I think we finished off, I think it was 8. I think that's what we did. So I think the only step left, if I'm right in thinking, is I think there are only 9 steps, which means that we've only got one function left to write, step 9. And this is our submit form. And currently we have a debugger in it. I'm going to just delete that for the moment, just in case we no longer want that. I think that's one of the last things that we were doing just before we had a break. And okay, what is our step 9 thing telling us to do? Honestly, it looks like there's several steps. So this might take us a second. Okay, so it's saying make a new friend object, trimming white space from username and email. Okay, that sounds pretty good. I feel like we had a preview of what that would be like in our simple form. And then the next step says B, prevent further action if either username or email role is an empty string after trimming. Okay, cool. So actually this step B sounds like it's just one further step along. So I feel like in our simple form, we didn't actually prevent any further action being taken. I think, as I was saying at the time, it's like a user could input any info into the form, and the submit function would take it and run no matter what it was. This is saying to us, hey, actually, if you smash the submit button over and over again, or even once, and there's no input, and it's an empty string, then I think what we want to do is we want to bail out of the function, because the next thing it says is we're going to post a new friend, which is presumably this object we've just made, to the back end. And on success, update the list of friends in state with the new friend from the API. Okay, so that it seems like this post here will be the last thing that really completes the loop. And once we've got that going, in theory, we should have the whole entire app working. Because I think if we look back at the UI right now, the one thing that we know that because of the debugger that we placed just before the break, that when we input information into these forms here, we know that we are getting those bits of data are going into state. But the problem is that we are not able to render them down here in this card, which should dynamically update. So I think what happens is if we do a post, our fake post, our list of friends in state should update, and that'll be done. And then only the very last thing that we'll want to do is D, on success, clear the form. Okay, so going back to step A, make a new friend object, trimming white space from username and email. I feel like you can probably give a go at completing step A, and I think it will be good to either try to just do it from memory or go back and check up on the simple form that we did before to see if you can remember the pattern. And so I'll give people just a minute to think about that and play around with it. And if anybody wants to drop into, oh, amazing, somebody already has, incredible. I'll give people a little bit longer to have a look. So this is just for step A. Okay, nice. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing, I'm seeing a couple of responses in the thread. Cool, and Marcos, I think what you have written, oh nice, and some more ones coming in also, that's great. Amazing, awesome. Marcos, it looks like you had the first answer that looked right, or the object that I was looking for. Chaz, I also like what you've done as well. I think that would also probably work. But yeah, let's just drop in new friend. Okay, so let's see. So we have, oh wait, I didn't actually do it under. Just to keep our comments in the right place. So yeah, we've made a new friend object. We've trimmed the white space. And that's right, we're grabbing this from form values because that is our slice of state. And I love it that you have not trimmed on role because you've correctly spotted already that that's not a string. So it doesn't need, there's no white space is possible to have been put there. So it's not, you haven't needed to trim it. That's great. Awesome. Okay. So B, I think we just discussed a minute ago kind of what the point of B is, you know, why we want to do it like this. So to prevent further action if either the username or email role is an empty string. So if it is an empty string, then we don't want to post anything. We don't want to change anything. We just want to bail out of the function. And there's like a very typical way that we like to bail out of functions. So we're probably going to do it some kind of a return, I'm guessing. But the real question is, we're going to return at some point here, but what I'd like you to have a think about is what it is that you think we should be returning. How can we use some logic to bail out of this function? And I will just give people a minute to think about how we could do this check. So it seems like we have to do some kind of check on username, on email, and on role, and to check if they're empty. So if anybody's got any ideas, feel free to. Nice. Okay, Joe, that's looking pretty good. So if new friend.username is an empty string or new friend.email is an empty string, alert, invalid inputs. Okay, that's cool. I really like that. That's a great answer. There's another one coming in as well, Alden. Yep, these are some really good checks. Could throw a custom error and build out error handling. That's all very true. These are super good answers. Seriously, great answers. I'm going to do it in this like very, very simple way. Just because this is like it's just nice to show a really succinct bit of conditional logic. So if new friend dot username. So, and as you can see, we've got the bang operator here. So basically this is just going to evaluate this and see if it's true or false, if it exists or it doesn't exist. Or there is no new friend dot email. Or there is no new friend dot role. Return. And yeah, there are, of course, this is JavaScript. There are many, many ways of doing all of these things, but I like this way. As it happens, it's just all nicely in one line. Awesome. Okay, so C. Wow, okay, so this is the first time we've had to do an Axios or Axios-like request today, or maybe in a while, it kind of feels like to me. So actually, honestly, C and D probably are gonna happen. They may well end up happening sort of all together, I would say. Even though they're two different things, we might want to end up including them in the same function. So what I think I'm going to ask you to do is attempt C and D, but I don't necessarily need you to write the whole of the function. it's completely fine to either write out what you think the whole thing would be, or just to kind of give it some scaffolding. I remember last week when we were talking about Axios requests, we were sort of scaffolding them out. So it's an Axios.post. Let's try and remember from memory, see if we can remember what that post invocation, what arguments it takes. Let's have a look. Chaz, that's awesome. I can see that you've had a really good idea. That's very much the kind of thinking that I would do. In fact, I might just use that. But yeah, if anybody else wants to sort of see if they can challenge themselves to remember how to do an Axios.post request, if anybody else is brave enough to drop it in Slack, I'd love to see it. Never did post requests. Really? I mean, I believe you because you've been through this curriculum in a way that I haven't. Never did post requests. True story. Okay. Well, in which case, I think it might just be worth having a look at our. So I don't know if you could just see what I did there. I hovered over the Axios. I'm on a Mac. It'll be maybe Control or something on Windows. And yeah, you can just jump straight into using VS Code's built-in thing. You can just jump straight into it. And okay, so we can see what this post does, what it's supposed to do. I'm just like looking on line 18, number 1. What I can see is that when we do a Axios.post, it's going to take 2 arguments. We can tell because they're separated by a comma. The first argument is going to be a URL, and the second one is going to be an object. And my guess is that the object it's going to be is the new friend object that we just built in step A. Okay, so since this is so awesome and looks pretty great, I'm going to take what Chaz has done and drop it in here. The one thing I'm going to change though is, as we can see on line 55, when we're doing the Axios.get, where it really wants us to go is let's drop in our fake API.com here. Awesome. Okay, so then what we're doing is we're doing an Axios.post. It kind of makes sense if you haven't done post requests before, but it kind of makes sense that it's going to need basically 2 things. It's going to need the URL to which this data is actually going to be posted. And it's also going to need that data. And very often that data is going to be in the form of an object. And in this case, it's going to be in the form of the object that we've just constructed, the new friend. And what it's going to then do is, what was the next step? We needed to set, so once that has been successfully posted, then we hopefully move into the .then logic. And if it was not successfully posted, we would move into the catch statement on line 48. But assuming that everything went fine and we have our response, then we want to update our state. We want to set our friends to be whatever that res.data is, whatever that data is that's coming with our response body. And then I think again it says, what does it say? On success, update the list of friends in state with the new friend from API. Yep. That should be taken care of by this. And then D, also on success, clear the form. And as we know, we can get that form to go right back to its initial state by using the set form values hook and just taking in the initial form values, which we know to be this empty object. Okay, so I think that's going to work. I certainly hope it's going to work. Let us give it a go. Please show. Okay, yeah, hold on. Yeah, Chaz, also thank you for dropping in some interesting info into the, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to open it up. but yeah, that looks like it's going to be Free Code Camp is a really great resource. That's fantastic. Okay, so let us try and do, let's say, Rhiannon as the username, and then rmail.com, and then instructor. Let's see if we've now got it to work. Incredible, amazing. We are now finally completing the full cycle of what we've been intending to do. And we're now rendering things that are coming back from the API because we have fixed all of our functions. We've made everything work. Yeah, I think somebody just asked okay, so that's basically it in terms of the code that you need to be really successful in doing this. Let me just really quickly check. Okay, nothing new in Slido. Somebody asked a good question. Could you please show us what the response looks like? Oh, nice. Okay, that's cool. So somebody has done yeah, if you have a look at Slack, you can see that somebody has, like, I think console logged out the response. That is awesome. I was actually going to have a look at something. I was going to have a look at one last thing, which is, yeah, just to make sure, just like as we're clearing up here, we want to make sure that our console is clear, that we don't have any errors. We can go and have a look in our components. And okay, this is too big for me to read at this point. And we can see that everything is what we want it to be. Oh, sorry, I remember what I wanted to show you. So I think if I just do a completely incorrect email address, I want to demonstrate that it's not going to work. Nice, okay, and so this is just an inherent bit of validation in HTML that it doesn't let us do anything, doesn't let us input an email address if the type is email. Okay, so I think that's everything that I have for you on this project. You should have some working code to take into your module project. Thank you so much for all your hard work. I definitely feel like I got people to do lots more, like posting stuff in Slack, which was, I think, really good, because obviously there's no better way to do this than to, try to like pull from memory things and code away. Looks like everybody's been doing that, so that's fantastic. Have a really great afternoon, and I'll see you guys tomorrow, if not sometime later in the day.